and he was the Deputy Minister of Decolonization. So Bolivia actually has a Deputy Minister of Decolonization. But it was interesting that in Canada, they concluded the whole Truth and Reconciliation Commission process was focused on education, which was also something very interesting. That's just by way of background where this happened. But I used it, the concept, as part of a critique of humanism. And about the fact that we are seeing the manifestation of multiple crises of humanism. So we've seen that in the 20th century with world wars, with the Holocaust, apartheid, all kinds of genocides, xenophobia in South Africa, and even the COVID-19 pandemic that we're talking about now. We're seeing in part that it's a crisis of humanism when we see the inequalities in places like the United States, where those that are affected most are African Americans, Hispanic people, and so on. So what the critique was against the whole, Western notion of the individual as being atomistic, disembedded, and a rational being that's autonomous, perhaps best captured in Descartes' cogito, I think, therefore I am. And so of course, I refer to the whole idea of the way in which the human becomes constructed through European Enlightenment and all the crises that actually produces. But it's the construction of the ideal human that then morphs into what we might call a molar identity. So that human becomes a man and who's white, and we've added so many things to that, able-bodied, heterosexual, et cetera, and that becomes the screen against which everybody else is declared different and othered, not because of the intrinsic worth. So that is what I do, and then invoke Ubuntu to challenge that whole notion. So firstly, if you look at Descartes' cogito, I think, therefore I am, then what Ubuntu in a sense is because we are, therefore I am. And so I invoke the notion to say that the way in which we think about subjectivity is in a sense very different. So the separation between mind and body gets troubled. So we're thinking in a sense of the subjectivity as being embodied, and that subjectivity is also embedded. So Ubuntu talks about, in a sense, is this notion of both being in the world, but also our becoming. And the only constraining factor on our becoming is actually life itself. So what should constrain our becoming as human beings is only when we actually harm other human beings, or when we harm the more than human world. So it's only life itself that actually constrains us. And so subjectivity, in a sense, becomes ecological. It's embedded, it's embodied, it's enacted. So that's what I then do, and then I connect that to the notion of curriculum, and that's where Currere comes in, because Currere is the etymological root, or the Latin root of the word curriculum, which means to run. It's the same root meaning of the word that we might use, such as current, electrical current, which suggests the idea of flow, or currency, when we speak about money. Currency gives a sense of flow. And that is contrasted with the Grecian or Grecian meaning of curriculum, which actually means a chariot track. So the way in which curriculum has been traditionally viewed, or the dominant view of curriculum, coming from Frank Taylor right through to Franklin Bobbitt, to Ralph Tyler, to outcomes-based education, to John Biggs's notion of constructive alignment. That notion of curriculum is that the curriculum is actually already mapped out and already planned. And it has a normalizing and homogenizing effect because everybody follows the same predetermined plan, which is in a sense colonizing. It's dehumanizing. And so bringing the idea of curriculum as currere, which means the focus shifts from what is already planned, what becomes dehumanizing because it ends up, people they get tracked and they are kept on track. They are kept on track through the disciplines, and they are tracked by standardized tests, etc. in education systems. So it brings together those ideas because it shifts the focus. Currere shifts the focus onto the human being, and it was developed as an autobiographical method in curriculum studies to talk not about the race or the racetrack, but the focus is on the person who is running the race. And of course, those ideas were extended further by a Canadian scholar, Jason Wallen, who actually says that the potential of the human being already exists prior to thought, and there are multiple potentialities for human beings. But what the traditional view of curriculum actually does, it severs the power of curriculum as something that unfolds and that is about the becoming of pedagogical lives, that we cannot put a limit to and we can't actually predetermine. And so I brought those two ideas together in this notion of Ubuntu, Currere. But I'm not the focus here today. So my colleagues from UKZN have picked up on these ideas and they've used it in particular ways in recent publications. And I am now going to hand over to them. And I really look forward to listening to Ulamuli as well as to Lester. So over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. So I will start. Excuse me. I hope everyone can hear me. It's very exciting for us. My colleague.
We hear you clearly, sir.
You hear me? Okay, good. So very interesting for us. My colleague, Dr. Hashwayo, and myself have been very excited about the Ubuntu Currere, and it has begun to reshape our research. And I hope that more papers will come. But just to quickly say that I will start to talk to quickly, briefly, to what we understand as Currere, and most of it is what probably Prof has already mentioned. But just to pave the way, to say this is how we understand, this is our theoretical thrust. And then I will quickly touch on how we have applied it in a way that we make the connections. And then after that, my colleague, Dr. Hashwayo, will give us more details in terms of the context in South Africa and also in terms of some of the moments or examples that we have come up with in our paper. So basically, I want to agree with Prof that the concept of Currere seems to really, come from this Latin understanding of the course, and that it has been taken up by, Pina and Wallin and of course Lagrange himself. But what I find very interesting is that the change of how the Currere itself seems to have, so the forms it has taken. So the first form, as we have heard already, is this form that sees Currere to run the course in a very experiential, individual manner. And that represents very much Pina's idea. But of course, we have seen that Wallin challenges it a bit or extends it a bit to begin to think of seeing Currere in terms of what power, what willpower, what power is embodied within this this Currere. And then obviously we begin to see Professor Leslie adding to that the adjective Ubuntu. And so for our theoretical thrusting is that we want to agree with both Wallin and Rograj in understanding Currere as something more than just an individual experience. That Currere really does embody power, and that this power can be either used positively or negatively. And using it positively means that we begin to see that Currere is always a force, it's always an active force. And we think using it negatively is when we posit this Currere as something that is reactive. And what do we mean by something that is reactive? And I think this is what has come up in literature, reading these authors, is that the reactive part really signifies that curriculum that seems to be planned, already given, a priori, and that therefore there's very little for us to be able to really imagine something new. And it seems this is the traditional curriculum that has shaped all of us, that has shaped many people in the world. That we are given curriculum, here are the objectives, here is how we're going to teach it, this is the assessment, and and then students pass and they go. But we're thinking that we need to begin to reimagine this a little bit more, to reimagine this, to reimagine the newness. And this is what comes into when we begin to think about the Currere as an active force. Currere as an active force thinks or helps us to think beyond the planned, to be able to bring in new issues. And I think this is exactly what we really find very interesting in our theorizing with Dr. Mlamuli. And then the other aspect, as I've already alluded to, is the idea of Ubuntu. The idea of Ubuntu, as we understand it, is that it is, of course, it opposes, of course, the understanding that is presented to us by people like René Descartes. I mean, the cogito ergo sum, that I think, therefore I am, to the fact that I am because we are. I am because of fellow human beings. And therefore, this idea of saying that, reality is relational is very important for us. And so the Ubuntu Currere, we are seeing Ubuntu Currere as a Currere which is an active force, but that active force that must be enacted using the tenant, the understanding of Ubuntu. And therefore, we are interested in seeing that this active force, embodies respect, embodies compassion, dignity, mutuality, and all those interesting aspects that, in fact, characterize or describe Currere. And so this is, for us, Ubuntu Currere, this is the theorizing that we have. What also it means is that if this Ubuntu Currere is an active force, it means, therefore, that it is always in becoming, that it is always looking for new things. And that aspect of in becoming is very important for us, because we see curriculum not as something fixed. We see curriculum as something that is always in becoming. And we need to be able to allow that within the university, within the academy, that curriculum cannot close learning. So we support that curriculum should not actually be seen as epistemic closure. It must always be open. Now, coming to how we have used it quickly. So in our two papers, if you see, first of all, we want to understand to understand this in terms of context. Now, we do argue, for example, that if we don't understand context, we probably may not be able to understand the role of Ubuntu. So Ubuntu in itself provides context. That's one thing. It provides epistemic context. It provides a way of understanding reality. It provides an entry into understanding how reality ought to be, how curriculum ought to be. It has to be woven within a context of Ubuntu Currere, not a cogito ergo sum. So that gives us first context. The second context is that South Africa has its own context within this global world. So much as we are in the global world, we also have our own context. So our higher education, for example, is affected by racism, it's affected by apartheid, it's affected by, I don't know, so many other things. And we have a particular context to talk to. But for us to be able to talk to this particular context, our Ubuntu Currere becomes our epistemology. It becomes our starting point. It becomes our lens of beginning to see curriculum within this particular issue. And the other way we have used it is to look at it in terms of what we term as democratic difference. So we do realize that, in fact, in South Africa, for example, in Africa, whatever it is, we have differences. I mean, we are not all the same. And something going back to Pina, when Pina talks about Currere being, being experiential, as how an individual experiences, we are also saying, yes, we have differences. But these differences are not supposed to be negative necessarily in court. These differences must only be forces that are going to sustain our Ubuntu Currere, our active force, the active force of Currere. And therefore that this difference begins to provide conversations and critiques that are necessary for us to maintain, the Currere, the active force of Currere. And the other one is to understand that this Ubuntu Currere is probably we posit it in a cosmopolitan view. Now, our argument is that South Africa, for example, is not a country on its own. I mean, South Africa belongs to the international world, to the global world, where people are different and so on and so forth. And yet, we want to understand. So therefore, we understand this cosmopolitanism as very important. Now, what does it mean? It means that we are not going to simply discard anything that is Western, it's useless. No, we are going to say, we are only going to remove the tag universal. We are going to understand how other people think and tell them that it is a context in which they're speaking from. So they have a particular context. And for example, the Western view of curriculum, the Tyler view of curriculum, it has come from a particular context. And we don't want to accept that. We want to challenge that to say this is not universal, but we also want to engage with it. We want our students also to engage with it. And therefore we think we support a kind of a cosmopolitan view of curricula. The other two aspects that we use Ubuntu Currere for are, for example, understanding that Ubuntu Currere therefore begins to challenge our top-down, curriculum, structures and strategies. That we begin to talk more, to deliberate more, to involve varied voices in producing curricula. And therefore that curriculum should certainly begin to really move beyond the given, the already there, to the imagination, to allow for imagination. And of course, lastly, we seriously think that in fact, curriculum therefore does not have to be posited as something that is fixed. In other words, we argue that there should be no epistemic closure, that every step that we reach begins another understanding of critique, begins another understanding of conversation that is taken within our understanding of respect, compassion, dignity, and so on within the Ubuntu Currere. So this is basically how we have understood the concept of Ubuntu Currere, and this is how we have also tried to apply it. And I'll ask my colleague to comment a little bit more in terms of probably the South African context, and also in terms of some examples or moments that we have used. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Brian. I really appreciate that, and thank you to Prof. Lagrange for that really insightful introduction. I must actually make a minor correction to Leslie over there. Leslie already called me a senior lecturer. Colleagues, I am not a senior lecturer. I am a lecturer. Of course, I do subscribe to Currere is always becoming. So I will not deprive Leslie the promotion, but just to clarify. But I think Brian has laid out quite nicely for us how we not only adopt Leslie's conception of Ubuntu Currere, but we also try to tease it out, stretch it out a little bit more to respond to the South African context, to respond to the different ways and challenges that are currently facing South African higher education. Of course, in the two articles, we formulate an argument and we argue that the South African academy deeply and profoundly is influenced and shaped by the logic of apartheid and colonization. And we formulate an argument by showing not only historically in terms of the foundation and the founding of historically white universities as supposed to extend British imperial education, we also moved into the founding of historically white Afrikaans universities as well, that were at least at the time supposed to act as epistemic alternative to the influence of those English liberal university and the continuing marginality, of course, that historically black universities continue to face. So we are quite specific about locating ourselves in the context that we are facing within the South African Academy. Of course, locating it within the 2015-2016 roads must fall, fees must fall, as an epistemic break, as a rupture within the academy where issues ranging from curricula and curriculum design, teaching and learning, rethinking academic staff development, the experiences of differently abled or disabled students, the exorbitant, of course, price of fees, institutional culture, marginality, and those other challenges. And so the challenge between Lester and I was to begin to formulate 3 or 4 moments of Ubuntu Currere. Yes, the theorizing and the philosophizing is critically important. It gives us the tool or the languages of legitimation or the tools of analysis, if you like. But we needed to be a little bit more specific in looking at some of the concrete moments where we think Ubuntu Currere could be enacted within South African higher education. And we came up with about 3. I think there's more in our paper, but there were 3 that stood out for us and that I'll be talking to in detail. The first one was around the issue of epistemic othering in terms of some of the epistemic traditions, not only from Africa, but also within the global South that continue to be marginalized. And we strongly believe Ubuntu Currere has a role to play for that. We also located our argument within teaching and learning as well, and formulating a critique regarding the outdated traditional, I think Brian called it a hierarchical conceptions of teaching and learning that are still quite dominant within South African higher education. And I think the final one that we began to propose, and this is a new idea that we began to formulate regarding the conception of community engagement or community service in the university, and how we still think there's a room for Ubuntu Currere to begin to reimagine and reconceptualize that relationship. Our argument, of course, is that at this particular moment, it's still quite anthropological, it's still quite colonial, and it's still quite extractivist. You know, you as the academic, you go there, you extract data, and you leave. And we think Ubuntu Currere can offer us some of the solution. So with the first one, in terms of Ubuntu Currere as a useful theoretical framework to assist us to think seriously about epistemic traditions, we argue, and I draw on this around the colonial and alienating and exclusionary curriculum that we still have largely in South African higher education. And I make an example within the philosophy of education, the discipline that I'm strongly ingrained in and that I'm writing in and that I'm currently teaching. And I argue that what Brian called it the recentering discourse. I argue that building on the work of Sabo Heleta, Sabelo Ndlovu-Katsheni, Achille Mbembe, and others, it is possible to argue for a recentering discourse when it comes to our own curriculum. And I propose that, for example, drawing on my own module where it begins with Plato's allegory of the cave, and that begins to be the central philosophical moment of why we need the philosophy of education and others. And I argue that part of Ubuntu Currere is around taking seriously the notion of these other epistemic traditions. And vis-a-vis specifically, I'm referring to African philosophy in this context. From Yongugu to Oruka, ethno-philosophy, sage philosophy, African liberation philosophy, professional philosophy, and others, including Ubuntu philosophy from Ramos and others. And I believe there is an epistemic opportunity towards decolonizing and taking seriously some of these epistemic traditions by foregrounding and centering it in our curriculum and reading the world, reading the global community from the positionality of Africa to the world. So we make sense of these philosophical contributions, we make sense of these concepts, building a solid foundation regarding what African philosophy is, what it is attempting to respond to, and then be able to read the other global philosophies as well. And we argue Ubuntu Currere is quite useful in giving us some of those solutions. And the second one, colleagues, is around teaching and learning. And we argue that arguably in terms of the 2015-2016 Rhodes Must Fall moment, the most deeply contested site, the pedagogic space, was the most critique side. Of course, the dead white man, why is my curriculum so white, and the other discourse. And we argue, Lester and I, that there is a room to reimagine these pedagogical relations. And we argue, drawing on Paulo Freire and others as well, that we don't have empty students in our lecture halls. Yes, they may be black. Yes, they may be black working class. Yes, they may be coming from quintile 1, 2, 3, but they bring with them indigenous epistemic knowledge systems that we can draw from to understand reality. Whether we do this through African languages, isiZulu, isiXhosa, Chivenda, and others, but it's to take seriously that relationship that I, as Mlamuli, I'm not the know, I'm not the expert. I am always becoming, in being able to be open-minded to A, the critical engagement with my students, and two, accepting some of the indigenous knowledge systems that they bring to my lecture hall and to my office, and to what extent we can incorporate that and make sense of it in the curriculum. Of course, part of that argument we make in the paper, we also formulate a critique where we suggest that often in the academy, the only space where students have an input, the only moment where students can critique and engage with the module or with the course is often during module evaluation. And we critique that as a disregard for student input, and we begin to propose to what extent can we reimagine, to what extent can we begin to recenter student voices in the ways in which we construct and design our curriculum. These will include your module templates, these will include your course outlines and others. That is part of a commitment to not only just an emancipatory pedagogy, but I think at the heart of the decolonial projects, that's what we are really talking about at the end of the day, recentering some of those student voices, critically engaging with them, not treating them as sacred and sacrosanct and outside of critique, but challenging them, thrashing with them, and seeing to what extent we can both be involved in the cumulative knowledge building. And so we argue with Ubuntu Currere that there is an opportunity where we can begin to move beyond, I think Leslie called it quite well, as the European, right, the Descartesian conception of knowledge, and us in the decolonial school of thought. We argue, we even take it further than that, and argue that it's at that point where we begin to see the emergence of the white male heterosexual colonizing subject, right? I think, therefore I am, right? And so in the absence of this communitarian collective body, so it's not only just a colonizing subject, but also ecologically devastating to the environment. And so we seek to move towards this colonizing subject and to reimagine a different kind of politics in the academy, a different kind of curriculum design in the academy, one that would be underpinned by social justice and trying to incorporate and involve student voice and student input as well. And the final point, colleagues, I want to touch on is the idea that Leslie and I are trying to develop, and we argue that Ubuntu Currere can be extremely useful in helping us reimagine the relationship between the public university and the community. Currently, this relationship I've already mentioned, it's quite characterized by this colonial, anthropological, extractivist relationship. Those of you who are in the academy, you know that we go to the community, we generate our data, we speak to them, we transcribe, and we come back and we get our degrees, we get our publications, we get our promotion. So this neoliberal colonizing gaze is still being reinforced beyond the university to the community. And I argue those kind of relationships are not rooted in meaningful growth. We go there as the knower, we go there to extract, and we leave without trying to make a meaningful difference. And I argue, and we argue rather with Lester, is that between the public university and the community, we need to reimagine this relationship. The university cannot exist and cannot behave like it is outside of society. The university is part of society. Some of the challenges that are facing the university are actual societal in nature. And we argue that we need to reimagine this relationship so that at least there is common understanding, at least there's common respect, at least there's mutual benefit and mutual growth, including mutual gain, in the way in which we see the community and in ways in which the community gets to see us. And as you can imagine, we see this relationship in the use of Ubuntu Currere as not only a decolonial device to some of us, but also dialectical as well, in that it's not one way, it's also trying to work with that cosmopolitan and democratic difference that Leslie was speaking about. And I think when it comes to the community, it's absolutely important that a new kind of social contract gets to be established, because currently the one that we have is currently exploitative and is geared towards reinforcing some of those neoliberal performative regimes that some of us have to have regarding your PUs, your performance management, the number of publications that you have. And so the university, the community rather, is a useful data reserve for us to go collect data and live as it is. And I think Ubuntu Currere, as a theoretical tool, as a philosophical approach, does offer us some solutions towards rethinking this relationship and at least beginning to rehumanize it and make sure that it's underpinned by values of democratic difference as well as social justice and others as well. Leslie, I work in the decolonial tradition, so time for me is extremely subjective. So let me stop there for my safety, and hopefully we can continue other critical engagements at Q&A. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lester and Umlambuli. So thanks very much for your insightful presentations, and it's complex concepts that one is dealing with, but you've managed to do that within the time limit. So we have about 20 minutes for further engagement. And I think maybe we should try this by actually getting people to put on their videos when asking questions rather than only using the chat. And maybe we could get 3 questions or comments, and then you could respond to that, and then we can see whether there's a sort of another round of questions that we can do within the time that is available to us. So I have seen one question on the chat, and Pietro Dupree has asked how you think these ideas can sort of pan out within international discourse. So that was the question, and I think there might be another. Yeah, so is it Karen or Karen? If you could ask your question, you can unmute your mic and your video, and then you can proceed.
Okay, fantastic. Oh, I love this. It's a highlight to my entire month, my new month and last month. I have a question. Lamuli, we've met before, and I love your paper. I work in the STEM space, and of course, you know, the common arguments are in terms of looking at what we do epistemically, or how we view the epistemic origins of something in engineering fields particularly, and that's my space. We are always confronted with, yes, but this tradition, this body of knowledge, etc. My question is, how do we straddle the divide in terms of applying the principles of Ubuntu Currere when you have kind of professional body governed fields like engineering? I'm thinking of the health sciences as well, where in our context, if you want to go with the notion of context sensitivity, context specificity, how do we straddle that divide where we're aligned to, let's say, international global standards in terms of the engineering, the International Engineering Alliance? The standards are set in stone, and our colleagues, the academics working in this space, see this canon, which one would regard in the humanities as a canon, but in the sciences, in our space. Does it mean that we are limited to applying Ubuntu Currere only in the teaching and learning space, or only in, you know, relevant reference, for example, to sustainable development goals, etc.? So, I mean, I just like your insights about how one straddles that divide, particularly when you're working in STEM fields. Thanks.
So is there maybe another question that somebody would like to ask? So you can go to click on participants, and then you can raise your hand if anybody else has a question or comment to make. So it looks as if there's... Okay, so in the chat it just says that the comment that was actually made, the previous comment, is an important one. And then I don't know, Deirdre, would you, I don't know whether... So Tembing Nkosi has said that powerful and eye-opening idea indeed. How do we practically ensure in communities where we mine data, people benefit? What is an example of what we can leave or co-develop with them? Most of the time we come back from universities into the communities as job seekers and workers. So that was a further comment. So Mlamudi and Lester, would you like to maybe respond to the first set of comments and questions?
So thank you very much. I think the first question talks to how these ideas would can pan out in terms of the internationalization discourse. And this is very important. I think, thank you very much for your question, Pedro. I think, so one thing that we must understand, two things that we must understand. So one is that we are joining a conversation, and a conversation that is challenging a lot of things that have been already given. So there's a very serious thinking that both that Prof. Lagrange and the rest who are writing on Ubuntu Currere and Currere in general can show us where indeed we have serious a priori already given a frame of work. And internationalization is one sector or one aspect that sometimes is presented in this particular manner. That is presented in a manner as if this is how things have to be done in terms of internationalization. And we argue, as I've argued elsewhere also, that we need actually to begin to start engaging our understanding of internationalization itself. That internationalization should not only be something that where people just go to get socialized within the understanding of what happens in the international sphere, but it should be critiqued. It should be understood in terms of what are we gaining from internationalization, in the sense of how are we growing, how are we changing attitudes, how are we probably learning new ways of doing, and in this case, new ways of doing curriculum. And so I think that the challenge that we do have, which also will be talking to the question that somebody asked here already in terms of the standards. I think Professor was talking about in terms of the traditional the work that they do in the professions and so on, the professional bodies and so on. The major challenge that we're having here is the issue, the fact that we work in a framework that is already given, a framework that is a priori, a framework that says this is how things have to be done, or you must make sure that you do this because it will be accepted at Oxford. If you don't do this, it will not be accepted at Cambridge. So we work with a mindset to please the people who understand things in a particular framework. And we are saying we need to begin to start serious conversations to begin to challenge the already given. And it's not going to have a solution probably today. We don't have the solutions, but we are developing conversations. And the conversations that are important to begin for us in general to reimagine whether you're talking about internationalization or whether it's about the curriculum and so on. So we are basically responding to the global thinking, a particular thinking of the already given. And we want to work with that framework. And we are saying, can we reimagine things? What could be the alternative? And Ubuntu Currere begins to give us that alternative as a conversation. Thank you.
And I completely agree with you, Lester, that the critique is the alternative. The critique itself is the beginning towards the quest of formulating some of these solutions. And so there is a need for us to highlight, and I note the internationalization question. I'm reminded of a provocative paper or article that was written by a colleague, deliciously titled From dumb decolonization to smart internationalization. You know, just that's how it was phrased, and it just chastising us and everything. But I do argue, colleagues, that, and we need to be careful, Ubuntu Currere is not a call towards nativist or Africanized scholarship. That's not the argument that we are formulating. That's why even in the two papers that Prof. Legrand added to them, there is always an attempt to link these arguments with the broader struggles that are happening in the global south. The students' movement phenomena and the quest for decolonization and transformation are not peculiar to the South African experience alone. At the moment, we are seeing the very same thing at JNU, that's Jawaharlal Nehru University in India, with a decommodification, anti-sedition protest led by students. We are seeing the same thing at Hong Kong University, where the students are using the public university as an epistemic resistance against what they see as the encroaching powers of the Chinese central government. So this dialectical relationship between the university and public politics, Ubuntu Currere being able to be applicable towards broadly in the global south, I argue that it's already there. And Karen, I wanna agree with you, and we've had this conversation before, but I will agree with you nonetheless. We also need to be able to see some of the challenges, particularly within professional bodies and qualifications that are quite strongly regulated. I'm referring you to, of course, education could potentially be one of them, the LLB program, pharmacy, the medical sciences, quite a lot of them, and others. And so there is that strong psychology, both clinical and counseling as well, two, where you can see the strong framing, whether from the content to how it's being taught, what needs to be taught, are regulated by this very heavy external body that ensures that curricula and pedagogy tends to go one way. But I argue, colleagues, that that cannot be the end of the conversation. That cannot be what Brian called epistemic closure. I think the critique itself in whose standards are being adopted, where are they coming from, who are they serving? Are they serving the private white middle class citizens in South Africa? Are they serving the millions of black working class students right now? Let's critique and let's problematize this standard and not look at them as sacred and sacrosanct, but as broader agenda that need to be incorporated towards transformation. And Leslie, I think there was one more question regarding more practically, what would it look like? I think my brother over there was saying they go back to the community because they want jobs, they need to be employed. I'm not offering a critique. I'm not offering a critique and say don't get jobs. Lamudi is saying be unemployed. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying the way in which the university in its current constitution tends to treat community engagement or community service. It's in this very anthropological extractivist nature where students and academics go there to extract, anthropologically extract and leave is deeply troubling. And so whether we need to co-create some of these projects together with the community, whether we need to formulate some of these research design with the community, whether we need to actually bother to sit down with the community, with the research side, to try and understand what exactly are their challenges and how we can begin to respond to them. I think there's something emancipatory about going to the community as a co-researcher as opposed to going there as a knower and going there to extract, to extrapolate, and then to leave as well. That's the relationship that I'm trying to problematize. It's deeply problematic and needing to be reconceptualized as well. Leslie, I'll end over there for now.
Thank you, colleagues. So I'm going to read another set of questions and possibly our last round of questions and comments. So there's a question. Is there a significant difference between Ubuntu Currere and the humanizing Currere? So is there a nuanced difference between them, or are they essentially the same? I think that's what the question is asking. And then there's a question by Evelyn. The question is, whose standards? How did they become standards that should be followed? It is basically power and resources. I think it's probably following the same line of critique that you have been making. Then Kerry Lee, I think that Prof. Wolf is asking, what Prof. Wolf is asking is profound. It calls into question how to think about and manage the spaces in which we are constantly being structured, but at the same time are also structuring others. And within these evolving spaces, one should consider how much agency a human really has and how this can be enacted in spaces that are both limiting and affording. And then another comment by Evelyn, internationalization is a pot that should contain all ideas for all humanity. African ideas matter. Then Pietro commented, African ideas matter. So does internationalization, this is the dialogue I wish to put to the table, given that Dr. Shawa seemed to be associated with Deutsche Stiftung. I have to tell me more about the German there. And then Michael Samuel, we'll get to Michael now, who would like to comment. And then there's another comment, internationalization should be a mutual process, not only Eurocentric knowledge coming into Africa, but just as importantly, African knowledge going towards the influencing global knowledge. Then Daisy has said, refreshing perspective indeed, Ubuntu Currere, but are we setting up another set of binaries by focusing on the human? What about relationalities, especially illuminated in the time of COVID-19, relationalities as both human and non-human? And then Carol Burton, would you describe Ubuntu Currere as an ontology, which then will influence all areas of practice? And Pietro says, I agree with Daisy. So I'm going to just ask Michael now to make his comments, and then colleagues, you can respond to whatever you're able to do quite quickly. So over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Leslie. I really want to expand the idea that this is a complicated conversation. And if we had the simple answers, then I think it would be antithetical to the argument of what Currere is actually making. So I want to pose the question that very often humanities courses tend to see that philosophy should be an essential part of the foundations of a discipline, the foundations of where the discipline builds its rationale and its logic. And yet when we look at the traditional sciences, in the natural sciences, we do not seem to see enough in the curriculum on where the philosophy of mathematics comes from, where the philosophy of physics comes from, etc. So we take it for granted that they are philosophy-less, and we present it in a particular worldview. And I think it would be interesting to look at how sciences are taught in different comparative perspectives across the world. So I'm thinking about in Asian context, in the Arabic context, how is the philosophy of science understood and approached in order to promote this kind of dialogical view that our knowledge, our epistemic values are not disconnected, or as Leslie correctly said, disembodied from where we are, where we're situated in time or in space. So that's more a comment to reinforce the idea that we should be studying the philosophy of science as a foundational course before we begin in engineering or health sciences or any of those. That's more a comment than a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So we've run out of time, but I'm going to ask both Lester and Umlamuli to maybe just make a very brief response. I'll give you 2 minutes each. Sorry about that. But there's many comments coming through, and of course, we can continue the conversation way beyond this webinar. So colleagues, I'm going to give you 2 minutes each. So maybe just respond to anything you would like to.
So thank you very much, Professor. I think that I am very excited with the comments that have come here through. They just show that the conversation is important. I would want to say, yes, some people talk about internationalization and where Africa stands. I think this is exactly what we're talking about, that we are saying we don't necessarily want to disagree with what happens elsewhere, but we want to recenter, where we come from, want to recenter our epistemologies and so on. So yes, internationalization embodies even our own African ways of thinking. And what has happened is that these have not been given priority with time. So we want to be able to give priority to our African epistemologies, African ontologies, and so on. Someone was just talking about whether we think, the ontology of Ubuntu would actually be used in shaping practice. Obviously, I'm sure that with this conversation, as we go on, we should be able to use Ubuntu Currere indeed to begin to shape policy and practice. And of course, in a very active force. So in other words, without necessarily closing the discussion, without finality or fixed. So I would like to stop there.
Lovely. Thank you so much, colleagues, and thank you, Prof. Lagrange, for the awesome session. I agree with you, Brian, as well, that Carol, calling it an ontology is quite restrictive, I think, because of the different epistemic possibilities that are in Ubuntu Currere. So I'm not sure how to formulate it for now, but let's not close it into just a way of being, but there's also knowledges, perspectives, and things like that, including, of course, your way of being within Ubuntu Currere. So I think the more open it is, the more possibilities it offers us. And in a way, I'm already responding to Daisy's concern about the potential to construct other binaries between Ubuntu Currere and I think what Eurocentric thought, and again Ubuntu Currere and other non-beings as well. And colleagues, there is absolutely nothing within Ubuntu Currere, certainly that I've read and that we formulated as well, that would suggest that Ubuntu Currere does not take seriously ecological justice. There is nothing in Ubuntu Currere that would not talk about biocentric equality amongst all the species in the natural habitat. So like Michael, let's keep teasing out and broadening out the philosophical approach. And I think the broader it is, the more possibilities it offers us. I certainly can already see a conception of justice that would look at ecological justice under the perspective of Ubuntu Currere. It could work like that. There is nothing in Ubuntu Currere that would be either anthropocentric or that could seek to position the African subject or the global South political subject as the only subject in the ecology. I would reject that kind of discourse. So certainly, colleague, it does offer us multiple opportunities, and perhaps that's grounds for future research to see to what extent there could be the relations between beings and non-beings, and to what extent Ubuntu Currere can help us resolve some of those challenges. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you very much. So, two brief comments from me on the question of ontology. I would say that it's an ethico-onto epistemology. And the other thing I want to say is that the question in relation to almost whether Ubuntu Currere is promoting an Africanist or African humanism. The way I understand it is that Ubuntu is a microcosm of relationality of everything in the cosmos. So it's actually emblematic of relationality in the cosmos. And so it certainly is not something that is speciesist in any way. And so Ubuntu needs to be understood in terms of the Shona Ukama, which means relatedness to everything in the cosmos. So thank you very much to Umlamuli and Lester from the questions that have flowed, and the chats are still going on. It just shows that we've had a very productive and stimulating conversation. And of course, that's what the purpose was, to stimulate conversation and to develop these ideas further so that the conversation can continue. So thank you very much for your inputs. We also, and I'll let Labby probably say a last word, but what we also want to do is we want to broaden the conversations of this particular SIG. And this was the beginning of a number of conversations that we would like to have, and to keep the conversations going and to make them complicated ones. So thanks very much to everybody who participated, and to those who we couldn't get to table your questions or your comments. We're sure that there will be many more opportunities to do so, and yeah, keep engaging with this idea and develop it further. There's certainly prospects here for a good scholarly book that could emerge from this particular conversation. So Labby, I don't know whether you want to have a final word?
Yeah, just to say thank you very much, Leslie, for hosting this session, to Lester, Brian, and Lamuli Slatweya for your insightful input into the session, and obviously to Petro for coordinating the curriculum studies SIG. We certainly would like to see more engagement, more complicated conversations like this. Unfortunately, we are in a state where ecological justice has shown itself. We have this virus that has basically dehumanized us to such an extent that its power has been shown to all of us. So nothing is cast in stone. Every person, every individual, every bit of the ecology and the environment has its say at some point. And I think part of this Currere Ubuntu is about raising the voice of those that are silenced. So with those few words, thank you very much for participating in this webinar. We hope to see you again shortly. There are monthly sessions that are being put in place. Keep in contact with us. You can even send an email to our administrator, Rose, at SAERA.co.za, and she will update you on any other events that are unfolding. So thank you, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleagues. It was absolutely lovely seeing all of you, and we'll see you at the next webinar that will be distributed, all the information later on. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Debrief.
Chris, you okay? Colleagues,
Yeah, my internet popped off, but it came back on.
Okay.
They're busy with fiber here, and they bloody will break something every day.
So just stay on for a short while and just have a small meeting amongst our.
Okay.
But maybe we can leave, eh? We can leave now.
Sure, thanks.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much.
Leslie, we really appreciate it.
How are you doing?
Yes, we'll be in touch about some prospects going forward.
Yeah.
Please
Okay.
do. Please
Get
do.
back on.
Thank you.
Get back on.
Yeah. Okay.
Well done, Lamuli and Brian. We're looking forward to the next paper.
Thank you. Thank you for giving us the the drive. Thank you.
Great. Guys, thanks so much. Leslie, what you thought? Was it okay? It went on?
Yes, no, I think it went very well, it has certainly stimulated things. I see that 25 chats, or probably people also saying goodbye.
Yeah.
But I think 59 people
59, yeah.
participated. So that was great. So there was, yeah, good interest. I thought it went well as, for the first one. And yeah, I think they...
I also thought it was good. I didn't expect such a big number. I think, you know, if we can think about how we can manage the 1 hour a little bit better, right? So we limit the introductions. We just get on with the business, let people present, because the real exciting stuff was happening at the end. You know, the questions.
Yes.
That was
Well,
exactly
it was the first one. So
yes.
Yeah, it was the first one. So the others wouldn't need the introductions.
Yes. Well done, guys.
Are you not facilitating the next one, Murti?
I think I'm a speaker on the next one.
Oh, you're the speaker. Whoever's facilitating, is it Pietro?
Yeah. I'm doing September.
September.
Who's doing the end of July?
Sylvan.
The next one is organized by you, dear Sylvan. Can you take the lead?
You, Sylvan.
Can't hear you.
Your sound is off.
You must unmute, Sylvan.
Okay. That's exactly what I was going to say. I'm so slow with this technology stuff that I might just mess up the next one. But what I can do, I can introduce the speakers, right? But I wouldn't want to be the one that take the questions at the end, because I think now I saw Leslie reading the questions, but of course, if you are co-hosting, then you can see the questions, right? Fully.
But it might be difficult for them to. It might be difficult for them to actually go and look at the questions.
Yeah,
so
so
maybe,
I was thinking.
Maybe,
the thing which we're organizing this is that I think we need 2 persons to track the questions on the chat. And at the point of engagement is those 2 persons will raise those key issues.
Yeah, fewer questions at a time, you know.
Yeah.
Take 5 and then another 5 or whatever.
Yeah. So we'll track all the comments as they come in, and then the 2 people who will be tracking those comments could then, you know, pose those questions to the group, and then in that way we'll manage it.
That will be great. If someone can do that.
Can you remind me about what the brief is for the next one? What's the topic?
Something about neoliberalism.
Shams, can you say? Sorry, ladies and gentlemen. Neoliberalist curriculum in the context of crisis. And we've got Salim Valley and Murti. But Salim is not pitching.
Yes, he's never responded. We'll have to think about the second speaker there.
Yeah, the other, the 2 things that we shouldn't have more than 2 speakers. That's for sure.
No.
Agreed.
So they are brief inputs, and if the speakers do have something that they've written on the topic, then that would be helpful to